grassroots organisation and coalition building, telephones and letter writing campaigns, using the media, research reports and testifying at hearings to maximise political influence. To these strategies, corporations added huge financial resources and professional advice. So when you look at NGOs, you need to think about who they're representing. In some cases, they're not representing community at all. They're representing business, or in some cases, they're quasi-government NGOs. So in some developing countries, governments are now setting up NGOs, which aren't really NGOs at all. And just a final point about this policy process before I go and talk about public participation is, but it obviously relates to the issues of public participation, is who gets access to parliamentarians. So this is the way in which, one way in which we can influence the process. And each of the two major parties in Australia, when they come into power, attack the previous party for being captured by special interest groups. And both are very strongly influenced by special interest groups, and the really interesting thing is to think about, they're quite different. So the Australian National Internship Program is a system that ANU has where you can spend time in a backbencher's or a minister's office in Parliament House and get credit for that. So if you're interested in doing that, let me know. And in the course of supervising those students, I often go to Parliament House, and it's quite interesting, having done that in the late days of the Keating government and then through the Howard government, just seeing different people in Parliament House. So in the late days of the Keating government, there was lots of Aboriginal advisors, Aboriginal spokespeople who I knew from my work in the Northern Territory, who you'd actually bump into in Parliament House, who had very good access to the Keating government ministers. That changed very dramatically when those people suddenly didn't have access to people during the Howard years, but other organisations and the Labor Party was saying that the Howard government was particularly captured by some special interest groups relating to some particular industries. So the example, one example that's been mentioned in some criticisms that the ALP had of the Liberals was the coal industry and their capacity to influence the greenhouse debate. And some of the consultation processes seem to be involved quite heavy representation for some particular industries. So you need to think about who gets a say at those agendas and who doesn't. And a final point just to think about politicians, government, the bureaucracy, is just how well informed the people that we elect are in terms of the environment. This is a lovely quote that was said by Trish Caswell, who was then the president of the Australian Conservation Foundation, so at a conference in Melbourne in '93. She said, "There's not a single Australian politician who understands the connection between economy, environment and trade." Quite a strong statement, but one that she believed in. So she was arguing that we don't have politicians particularly who are aware of environmental issues. The former treasurer in the Keating government once told me that this is John Kerrin, who's also involved, had a ministry relating to it was water resources, and he's responsible in a later incarnation for the Western District Land Management in New South Wales. And he said that no one in Parliament had a training as a geographer like he did, and it was very useful being able to tell, if you excuse the vernacular, shit from clay. So he had that background of understanding soil science, and he was saying that this is something that's not common in Parliament. It's full of lawyers and perhaps some people from the corporate areas, trade union officials. So the Liberal government attacked the Labor then opposition, being stacked with trade unionists. Trade unionists, lawyers aren't often well trained in environmental issues, so we need to think about the implications of that. And the final nice point from Better about this whole issue is in terms of public participation, in terms of the bureaucratic involvement, we need to have a well-educated community who can make a say. So I hope this is something that comes out in the public participation tutorials. It's all very well to say to a community, engage with this issue, but the issue is so incredibly complex that no one understands it. People can't effectively engage in a real way. And here Better's making a passionate plea, which I'll let you read for yourself, about the importance of well-informed community and the fact that television is tending to dumb down our society, and that has implications for how we run our country. Okay, so I want to move on to talk about public participation more specifically. Is Elaine here? Thank you, Elaine. So Elaine is your volunteer in terms of your local public participation process for next Monday. So if any of you have any feedback, hopefully you all got an email from me in terms of how this course is going. You can tell Elaine after the course, or send her an email. So we're trying to put in place a public participation process here where she can represent your views in an anonymous way. So often that's quite important in a public participation process, is that people might not necessarily want to go tell the Vice-Chancellor or the Minister that something is not working, that you're doing a terrible job. So often there's a need to set in place a process in ways in which people are comfortable to contribute. So it's a general principle that I will elaborate in terms of public participation. This is a photo from a process I was involved with, which was one of the most interesting and rewarding stages of my professional life. It was when I was working for the National Museum of Australia, and I was involved in a public participation process organised by the Murray-Darling Basin Commission. I'll say more about the Murray-Darling Basin in a later lecture, and there's a tutorial on that. But in this case, there's a community advisory council of representatives from right across the basin. And what they do is get together for a couple of days every 2 or 3 months and discuss issues, develop strategies and papers, and they had direct access to the Minister to take those ideas. So they could circumvent the bureaucracy altogether and had a very strong direct influence in terms of getting to government. Here we're meeting at the Moree Airport, and it doesn't rain often in Moree in Western New South Wales, northwest New South Wales, but it had on this occasion, and we couldn't get out of the airport. So we all flew in from all around the basin in light planes, had a really interesting meeting there. The whole idea was to do some field work and talk to local communities and go look at the Darling River, which is a couple hundred k away. But we had this meeting here with people flown in representing both geographic areas, but also work representing different organisations. So in the last week of tutorials, we'll talk about regional planning. So how do you effectively set up regional organisations to represent people? And this is a really interesting case study. They've sort of tried different models of having a representative from Farmers Federation, a representative from the trade unions, a representative from irrigators. Other times they focus more on regional representatives. So you're all represented on this committee, but I'm sure I'll be very surprised if there's anyone in this room who knows their representative. So that is an example of a process that's not working that effectively. So you all know, hopefully now, that Elaine is the person you can contact to give feedback about this course. But if you want to give feedback about how the Murrumbidgee catchment is being run, you do have a representative, but you probably don't know who that is. So a kind of breakdown in the communication process. Or maybe we've all chosen not to engage in that process. So again, I think that's something that some of your classmates will get you to think about in the tutorials. You know, why do we engage in some processes and why don't we engage in others? And often it's got to do with time. But it's also, I think, in many cases got something to do with, is it a waste of time? You know, are my views actually going to be listened to? Can I influence the process? Which then feeds into another key issue, which I'm sure will come out in the tutorials, about the timing of public participation. It has to be done at the right time. There's no point asking somebody after the whole decision has been made. So if you're reorganising an organisation and your boss says, you know, have a whole series of meetings about it, and then you find out the decision's already been made, it's tending to disempower people the next time they're asked for consultation. So there's 4 main take-home messages I'd like you to go away with in terms of public participation. It's a worldwide trend. So in most countries around the world, in most forms of policy, people are saying there's a role of the community. So it's interesting to reflect on why this is happening. You know, is it a belated recognition that this has real strengths? Other people are more cynically saying, well, government is trying to get things to do they don't want to do anymore. Or in some cases, government are doing it in a very tokenistic way and aren't actually sincere. So in different settings, all 3 of those things are true, I think. It's important for us to define what community and participation is. So they're much used terms, but people often don't sit back and reflect on what they actually mean. And you need to be clear on what they mean if you're trying to run a participation process, if you're trying to involve the community, what is the community? Peter and I already talked about the idea of social capital, and I think it's a key issue in terms of making public participation work. So you've got to have sort of goodwill within a community, you've got to have some functioning community values and attitudes for public participation to be effective. And I'll finish with some criticism of public participation and relate that to one of the most influential articles on public participation, which is the article by Einstein, which is on the electronic reading on the tutorial topic.